Thanks, Stacey. Susie, if you could just go to the next slide, please. All right. Before we get started, we are going to just have our statement of recognition. I'm sorry. This is September. It's the month where we have the Day of Truth and Reconciliation. So it is more poignant than probably other times, but for us to recognize our Indigenous peoples. So while we meet today on a virtual platform, let's take a moment to recognize, respect, and acknowledge the importance of the lands we occupy and from which we benefit. Today, let's reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improve relationships between nations and our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Let's remind ourselves that wherever we are, we live on the ancestral and unceded territory of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people. Next slide, please. Okay, so as most of you know, the Pop-Up PD is a series of free webinars that have been developed and put together by a committee of Ontario's LBS regional networks and provincial support organizations for literacy. The intent is to support LBS practitioners with presentations on topics that are important to them. The English language webinars have been presented for LBS practitioners annually since 2015 and are currently transcribed and contain ASL interpretation as well. And those are all uploaded and saved at on Contact North site, Pop-Up PD resources for LBS educators. As always, we are always looking for input on ideas for future webinars. So feel free at any time to send an email to the email that's on the screen now, eChannel at contactnorth.ca, or you can also send it to me at Quill Learning Network, and I can pop my email into the chat. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so today we are fortunate to have with us somebody that's some of you know, others don't, but this is Suzie Johnson-Smith. She is from Peterborough, and she is a dynamic coach, facilitator, public speaker, and international Bridges Out of Poverty trainer. Suzie has had several years of experience in human services delivery and leadership before becoming an independent coach, facilitator, and consultant. She has proudly supported countless organizations across North America in promoting person-centered services using the Bridges Out of Poverty concepts, combined with a transformational coach approach. Her educational background is in social work, adult learning principles, mediation, leadership, and change management. Suzie is also a certified life, leadership, executive, and organizational coach. She is passionate about lifelong learning and is dedicated to sharing strategies and insights that boost client and staff engagement, increase collaboration, and improve organizational outcomes. I'm excited to hear what Suzie has for us today, and I'm sure you will be blessed by what you learn as well. So Suzie, I hand it over to you now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Heather. And thanks for making this connection and reaching out to spend some time together today. I am excited to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart around motivating factors and working with diverse clientele and learners, particularly those that are struggling, under-resourced, vulnerable community members, and how we in human services can help. To move that needle towards a future story with them, alongside of them in a coach approach. So I am really excited to spend time without going on too much more of myself. I feel truly, truly blessed to be able to have a career that I love. Thank you, Valerie. To be able to spend time with folks that are like yourselves, that are just looking to continuously improve. And on that note, I want to thank you for the work that you do. The work we do is hard in human services and yet so rewarding. It can be challenging for so many reasons, and yet also just fill our cups up that we are helping and supporting individuals. We don't necessarily do this, for anything but love of trying to help people. And so, thank you for the work that you do. And my hope is that today you will gain just a couple of more tips, tricks, aha moments for yourself, even as you think about serving vulnerable populations and diverse learners. So I want to start off with a question, and you can answer it in your head, or you can answer it, just in the chat if you want to. But I just want to ask this simple question. Have you ever caught yourself thinking of someone as unmotivated? Have you ever maybe said it out loud, maybe just thought it to yourself, geez, that client or that learner, that individual is unmotivated? Only to find out later that maybe they were just motivated for something different than you were. Thank you, Dessa, for sharing. And you're not alone. You are not alone if you're answering yes. We often use the term unmotivated. In my many years of working in social assistance, I mean, we went so far as to use the terminology of unmotivated and non-compliant. So if someone didn't comply with the rules of engaging in employment services, well, then they were unmotivated and non-compliant. And we used a sanctions and monitoring, kind of a sanctions punitive approach to actually reduce or cut off their social assistance. And that all happened when the Ontario Works Act came in 1996. And it really was disturbing for me. So a few years later in my career in social services, we brought in a trainer that was a Bridges Out of Poverty trainer, an international trainer. We brought them in, and I truly sat there going, this is the piece we're missing. This societal lens in which we often use in the work that we're doing in human services, and how we sometimes meet people where we think they should be or where we are at, as opposed to where they are genuinely at. And from there, I followed that thread and continued to start to realize that I actually don't think personally that there is such a thing as an unmotivated person. I think that every single one of us are motivated for something. And the difference is what we are motivated by. And when I started to shift my way of thinking about motivation, and I started to recognize that everybody's motivated for something, and started to change my approach over the last 10 years using the learning from Bridges and coaching, that's when I actually started to see movement and changes. And so, within the clientele that I was working with. And so I'm really happy to share, some of those aha moments for me. And the reason why I started out with a question is because often we view motivation and we view society through our own lens. And our own lens is shaped by our belief, our values, our upbringing. We are shaped by many different facets of who we are and how we show up later in life. And so I want to first begin my first slide with, and I use a lot of mental models, by the way. So a lot of my slides are pictures, and then we're going to talk it through. I use a lot of the work that I do comes from Dr. Albert Bandura's social cognitive learning theory. Dr. Albert Bandura introduced this in the 1960s. He was a Canadian psychologist who introduced that there are three primary factors, not sole factors, but primary factors that greatly influence how we show up later in life, how we think, how we behave, how we act, how we prioritize. And he said, number one is our relationships and our knowledge with our caregiver, whoever raised us, whether, and so this slide is as much about you as it is about the people we serve. For a moment, I want you to think about yourself. Because the more we can actually understand ourselves, the more we can actually be effective in meeting others when they're coming from a different place. And so when we think about relationships and knowledge of the people that had influence over us, every one of us on this call have a different story, as do the learners that we're serving. None of us are clones of one another. Relationships and knowledge passed on by caregivers could be that you were raised by an auntie, maybe you were in foster care, maybe you had both parents, maybe you were raised by a grandparent. Whatever the situation is, and if I've missed anything in there, whatever the situation is, I want you to reflect on your own upbringing and your own caregivers. Some of us had good experiences, some of us not so good experiences. Either way, there was a lot of relationships, or sorry, there was a lot of knowledge passed on through those relationships, right or wrong. Things that are said to us as we grow up throughout and maneuver and work through our childhood or adolescence and into adulthood that shape the way we think, the way we act, the way we feel, and the way we prioritize. So I just want to ask a yes, no question. If feel free to use the chat if you want to, if you feel comfortable. But do you ever sound like your caregiver? Do you ever repeat something that sounds like someone that had, you know, that shared knowledge with you? Yeah, absolutely, Dessa says. Yes, Stacy says. Yeah. My sons and wife think so. Yeah, sometimes it's other people, isn't it, telling us you sound like you're whoever. Right. And so sometimes I go, I sound like my dad, and I'm all proud and I go, oh, I just sounded like my dad. And then sometimes I go, oh, I just sounded like my dad. I don't really want to sound like my dad in that instance. So sometimes we like it, sometimes we don't like it, sometimes it's a combination of both. Either way, oftentimes we might come across to our own children or our nieces and nephews or our peers or even the people and the learners that we serve with messages that are similar to our values and beliefs that were ingrained in our own minds when we grew up. So I often think of my dad said, "You work hard for what you get in life." And I'm not going to lie, that shaped me a little bit when I got into working with vulnerable people. There was a part of me, a little part of me that thought, well, work harder then, and you too will get what you want. And so when I started to recognize that my unconscious bias was being influenced by this relationships and knowledge that was passed on to me, at least I became more aware. We cannot self-manage unless we are aware. So really ask yourself, what messages were shared with you growing up that you sometimes repeat? And do you want to? Is that something that you want to carry with you? You have to be very intentional when you don't want to. There are lots of examples that I can give you about things that I say or do that are similar to my upbringing. But for the sake of time, I'm going to move on and have you reflecting on your own. Now, those things greatly influence how we show up in life, and so does the demands of our environment, the basic demands of our environment, the level to which we are nurtured, protected, and safe. If you grew up in an unsafe environment with food insecurity, without knowing, if you were going to have heat on or clean laundry or a warm bed to sleep in, then those demands of your environment will influence how you think, how you act, and how you behave as you maneuver and grow up later in life. Equally important is our access to additional resources, health, our physical health, our mental health, our sense of spiritual hope, many other people in our lives besides our immediate caregivers. So Dr. Albert Bandura said these three things greatly influence how we later in life think, act, behave, and make decisions, and how we are motivated. If you grew up in a household that said, thou shalt go to post-secondary, you work hard for what you get in life, 15 minutes early is on time, make good choices, you can be anything you want to be, then you're going to show up differently later in life than someone who is told repeatedly, we can't stop bad things from happening. This is just the way life is. There's no point in trying. We're in survival mode, and it's all about the now in this moment and surviving. Those are two very different environments as we grow up. And, one other thing about demands of our environment, and those of you on the line, if this resonates for you, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you grew up with food insecurity and not knowing where your next meal is coming from, even if you now have food security in your life, you will have a different or stranger relationship with food than those that never experienced food insecurity. I can speak from that from personal experience. So the demands of our environment influence how we later show up in life, even if the issue has stabilized. Feel free to give me a yes or no in the chat if that makes sense or if it doesn't make sense. But these three things greatly influence for us how we later show up, how we think, how we act, how we behave, and how we prioritize. Definitely makes sense. Okay, good. I always like to, I know it's webinar style, but I like to connect with my audience somehow, some way. All right. When we think about this, then the key points of this are that we are not clones of one another. We are all driven by different needs and different values. And what motivates you, still can't stand powdered milk, good example, Mike. Me too. What motivates you may not motivate your learner. And oftentimes, what we're trying to do when we say we meet people where they're at, we actually meet people where we think they should be or where we're at. And we start change talk or coaching conversations that are about goals that resonate more with us. Now, are we funded to help people stabilize? Of course we are. So today is not about saying just leave people where they're at, and if they're in survival mode, then that's okay. But it is about actually genuinely learning how to have conversations with people who are driven differently. When we're driven by survival versus driven by achievement, the conversations must look different. They would be a completely different person due to experience. Thank you, Tiffany. Exactly. This misalignment of when we sometimes meet people where we think they should be can often create frustration and disengagement. Sometimes then the people that we are serving might not show up because they don't actually feel heard. They might actually not feel as though you get it or that you understand them. And then we run the risk sometimes if we go too far the other way of just being a support system and helping them to actually stay stuck. And so today I want to help you find how we can use a coach approach to use language that actually gets at what their driving force is and connect the goals with the actual change talk. Connect the goals with that. So I'm just seeing what's in the chat here. And thank you everyone for sharing. Yes, absolutely, Janet. Absolutely. And thank you for sharing. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you for sharing that. So when we think about the social cognitive learning theory, this misalignment can start to happen in the way that we're showing up right from the very beginning. Because let's face it, some people are driven to survive, to feel safe, to feel secure. Some people are driven by health and they want to run a 10K marathon. Some people are driven externally through recognition and reward. But security and safety typically start where it's at, start us off. And I want to reference something that I learned way back 30 years ago in post-secondary. And Valerie, I'm going to come back to that question, okay? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when we think about the basic needs being met of psychological needs, food, water, warmth, and rest, I just want to go back a minute and see how that also corresponds with our social cognitive learning theory. If our basic demands and basic needs are not being met, it makes it near to impossible to actually work up the hierarchy of needs and get to the goal setting of self-actualization and setting goals. Now, I'm not telling you anything that you don't already understand. But when I started to really recognize the connection between the social cognitive learning theory and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and recognize that change and motivation, differ for each and every one of us, I was able to change the way that I started to approach conversations. It wasn't the individuals that I was serving that needed to change, it was my language that needed to change. So when we start to think about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how can we possibly expect our learners who don't have the basic needs and basic psychological needs of safety even being met, walk in the door and be able to immediately start talking about school and work and skill development and upgrading and that career goal? So when we truly start to meet people where they're at, then we start to actually ask questions that are around their driving force first. And that'll make more sense in a few minutes. A couple other pieces leading up to this is the stages of change. Change is not linear. And when I think about myself and change, and give me a yes or no if you've been trained in motivational interviewing and the stages of change, just so I can get a sense of how many people on the line are familiar with this. So I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. A few of you knows. So I'll use a little bit of humor here to explain a little bit about these stages of change. Because, it can be frustrating sometimes when we are helping people through the stages of change, when we are helping people to try and make changes. So they come in to access our services. They say that they want to take a course, a program, upgrade, learn English as a second language, whatever the case may be, that they're going to engage in our services to be able to move forward. And then what happens is they're in that pre-contemplation and contemplation and even preparation. When they come in to see us, they might be in contemplation. They're thinking about it. They're thinking about making a change. And then when they actually come in for their intake, we're in preparation. We're starting to fill out the paperwork. We're starting to tell them about our services, and they're in this preparation stage. All right. They might be starting to get supplies and starting to think about what do they need for transportation, etc. And then we're in this action phase. And this is changes for all of us, not just about learners in school. And then when we're in action, we're actually taking steps towards the goal. We've said we want to do take a course. We've filled out the intake paperwork. We prepared ourselves. Now we're into action. We are either then go from maintenance into we do well and we maintain, or we relapse and we start back at the beginning. Now, I wanted to explain those stages of change because I want you to reflect on a change yourself, because change can be messy. So for just a minute, I want you to reflect on a change that maybe you have tried to make for yourself. Got something in your mind, I hope? When we think about the stages of change, and you think about a change that you've made, did you succeed perfectly in the circle from A to Z? Did you go all the way through, miss the relapse, maintain, and have it done perfectly the first try? Or was it a little messy sometimes? And here's my story for you. It took me 17 times to finally quit smoking. 17 tries of going through this stages of change that you see before you. 17 of the purples relapse. Over the course of many, many years, get stuck in contemplation, Kathleen, yeah. Over the course of many, many years, you only need to succeed once. That's right, David. But you know what? It can become really messy and really tiring. And if I didn't have the kind of support systems that I had throughout, then I probably wouldn't have made it on the 17th time either. But I want to share this story just a little bit with you because it was through coaching and through asking questions in a different way that actually helped me to become successful at this on the 17th try. Because many times my doctor was saying you need to quit smoking because when you're overweight and smoking, you're at risk of a heart attack. And the kids would cry and say you need to quit smoking so that you can live longer. And, my dad would chirp at me because, he had emphysema and it ran in my family. And so lots of people were, to be quite honest, constantly telling me that I needed to quit smoking in a parental kind of a voice. You need to, you should, you have to, you need to just do this, Susie, you need to just do that. And it was only through the 17th time when I started to recognize a pattern. And it was through a coaching relationship that I had. It was when I was actually going through about 10 years ago when I was going through my coaching certification. And in order to become a certified coach, you have to receive coaching. And so, in that instance of being coaching, we started to map out together my support systems. Tiffany, my support systems related to coaching. Now, I want you to just give me a yes or no in the chat. Have you ever worked with somebody, worked with a learner, and perhaps they're working on sobriety or going back to school, but they're hanging around people that are drinking or using, or they're hanging around people that are skipping school, and you want to point out to them that, when you hang around so and so, that's when this goal is at risk. Have you ever worked with anyone that it seems so clear to you that when they hang around so and so, then the goal seems to, not come to fruition? Heck yes, Jamie. Yeah. And so it was through some conversations that I had with my coach, as well as just work I was doing myself, that I started to map out my social capital. I started to map out these stages of change, what I was doing to prepare for quitting smoking, when I was in action, what was happening that was not moving me to maintenance, but instead moving me to relapse. And typically, it was around an individual that I was spending time with. I had a friend as a fellow smoker, and we often would have coffee together on the weekends and just chat with each other about our weeks. And they were a very good friend of mine. And I knew that if I went over there for coffee and said, I've gone all week without a smoke and I really want one, I knew that they would say, well, I don't want to enable it, but if you want one, you can have one. And I'd go, okay. And so I knew that, and I was very manipulative in some sense, in that I intentionally went over there. And then my coach called it out on me. And my coach said, Susie, every time you are with this friend, you're identifying that you start smoking again. And I agreed that was the case, but I immediately rebutted with a defensiveness. But I don't want to give up that friendship, and I'm not going to stop seeing them. And so they just helped reframe it for me. What's one small thing that you could do that would actually prevent them offering you a cigarette? What's one small thing? And I had to really think about that. And the answer that I came to was simply that I started inviting her for coffee at my house instead, because there's no smoking in my house. And I'm only sharing this story with you because that was the time that then I suddenly became successful. I started inviting her over, and to go for a cigarette, she had to go outside, and therefore I had to really think about it. It started to make it easier for me, and I started to make a small change in my routine. Oftentimes, what we want to do when we see people relapsing, especially if we think it has to do with social capital, is oftentimes then we want to point out that if they hang around that person, then they're putting their goals at risk. When really the answers lie within people. What's one small thing that you could do then to avoid the temptation? It doesn't have to be never see that friend again. So, mapping out social capital through the stages of change and actually looking at with people what role individuals are playing in the goal and how that can be sabotaging is a very powerful way to help point out for people how they can build a stronger network or support system or make small changes. Right. Good analogy, Mike. And so my point in that is that for a lot of years, for my first 20 years in social work, If I was your client, I would have pointed out that every time you are with so and so, you start smoking again. And instead, we went sort of through a little bit of a roundabout way because many times for people that are in survival, relationships are needed to survive. And when we're asking people to give up relationships, it's not likely to happen. And then you might start to see Groundhog Day through these stages of change. So, small steps of what's getting in the way is a very powerful question. As much as we want to help people move through the stages of change and not relapse, let me tell you, you want to talk about the whole stage of change of dieting? Well, every Sunday I am preparing and contemplating what I'm going to eat that's healthy for the week. And then, by Tuesday, I've eaten healthy for 2 days, and then I blow it and I do something that's not on the diet, and then I'm into relapse. Does that resonate with anybody else? That then for the rest of the week, I go, you know what? That's it. Too much. I'll get back at it next time. So when we think about the stages of change, they can be messy. Yeah, been there. Diet is die with a T. I love it, Tiffany. And so when we think about stages of change, the reason why I wanted to share a couple of issues with you both and things that I've struggled through is because if you can start to connect your own goals and changes through this wheel, through these stages of change, and notice how many times and what things are getting in the way for you, you'll actually start to create more empathy within yourself for the people that we are serving in the fact that change is messy. Change takes a long time sometimes. And when we are supporting people through the stage of change, and if they have to give up a relationship in order to achieve, that can be a very painful process. So just pointing out that so and so is bad for them, for example, is really not meeting people where they are at if relationships are needed to survive. So, how can we expect people then to be motivated to achieve, to be motivated to learn, to be motivated to move through the stages of change quickly if we ourselves also sometimes struggle with the very same thing? If we're all motivated for different things. And again, today is not about saying that's okay, leave people stuck. But I want to first kind of drive a little bit of empathy in that we all experience stuckness sometimes and messiness with our changes. And now, can you imagine the individuals who don't have their basic needs met in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, who aren't, up towards the blue and the orange, who are feeling unsafe, hungry, don't have a good night's rest, etc. And, then the deeper struggle with the stages of change. Change can be hard, and we're asking people to make significant changes in their life. For not for a minute do I believe that the people that we serve don't want to change and have a better life. It's about connecting their motivating factor with the change and changing the way in which we coach. So, on that note, I want to spend a little bit of time on this one. When we think about motivation, I know I've said this already, but everybody is motivated for something. And motivation looks different for every learner. But sometimes when they're not motivated for the very thing that we are, or not moving towards the thing that we value, then oftentimes we haven't really found out what motivates the person. Motivation is random. It's shaped by our upbringing, our values, our personality, and even, our current environment that we're living in. Some people might be motivated to climb that ladder and they might be working nonstop overtime hours. A young parent might crave stability and sleep and just be motivated by quiet. Someone who has been through financial hardship or food insecurity or unsafe living arrangements will prioritize security and safety over anything else. But, variety and being motivated by different things is a good thing. It creates diversity amongst all of us. So, how do we find out then what actually motivates our learners? Because when we can find out what people value, what is important to them, we can help to create belief statements and we can start to actually help them move into action. When we start with things like, have you thought of going back to school? That's great that you're here. We have this program, and this program. I think this one would be great for you. That's fantastic. Let's get you signed up. Now, I'm not suggesting all the people on the line just go straight to change talk, but I know that when I was trained in case management, and for a lot of years, I had a plan for the client before the client even knew or acknowledged that there was a problem. So I was a fixer through and through. Do I have any fellow fixers on the line? You've got a resolution for the issue before the person is even in change talk. Angela? Yeah, I am. I often call myself now, I'm a recovering fixer, like you, Mike, right? I'm a recovering fixer to try and actually not move into fix it. And Joe, do you have your hand up that you want to ask a question, or are you just saying that's you? I'm just seeing that there's a hand up there. I'll just close it off. Okay. And so I am a recovering fixer through and through because many times the person would say, I want to get a job. And I would say, okay, we need to do this and this. Okay, that's awesome. Thanks, Joe. We need to do this and this and this. And let's get your resume updated and let's get you signed up for this. And oh, have you thought about going back to school? And have you thought about getting your GED? That would look great on your resume. And I would just jump right into my fix it approach right away as soon as they even remotely entered into our services. And I was missing things. So I want to throw out a few different pieces for you that started to change the way I had conversation. I started asking things like, what's most important to you? What's one small change that you'd like to work on? So I stopped asking, like, what's the 5-year goal? What's the 3-year goal? What's your long-term plan? And I started making them much shorter when I knew that people were living in crisis. What's one small change you'd like to work on together? What's one small thing that would help make your life better? What would become possible for you if you were to get that grade 12? How would life look if you were to take that course that's needed? What's getting in the way of following through on your education and training? How badly do you want this? What difference could education make for you? What do you want to see happen in your life? If nothing were in the way, what would life look like for you and your family? And what are you proud of? How would you describe yourself? How would you think other people would describe yourself? And is that how you want to be described? These are just some examples of questions that I started to ask that moved away from that traditional, what's the 3-year plan? And it started to mine for values for my learners and mine for values for the clients that I was serving. It actually started to open up possibilities because the key was that I started asking that question and then just letting them think. A powerful, evocative question that typically begins with what or how, that are about finding out what the person is motivated for, like what's most important to you in this life. What could make life just a little bit better for you? Those are so open-ended that if the person says, well, I wouldn't be poor and I wouldn't be hungry, now I've got a dream and now I can begin to plan backwards with them. And instead of me saying, well, have you thought about getting that grade 12 or GED or, taking some literacy basic skills course or whatever the case may be, or a budgeting course or anything else, now I started to plan backwards from a smaller way. Give me a yes or no if that makes sense for you. If anything is resonating for you right now, I just like to check in with the audience. I started to shift my questions to be asking smaller, values-based questions. Thank you so much for just being with me. So I started to shift my questions, my powerful questions that would make people think more about life, about priorities, about their values. So, for example, if I had a client that I knew their answers were around security and housing and feeling safe because that was their reality of not feeling safe for so many years, then I could connect. So if you were successful in getting your GED the way you'd like, and you are able to get employment, what doors does that open up as far as safe housing for you? Where would you be? What would you be doing if you weren't having to live in the shelter? Take me there. But client B that's motivated by new skills and learning and growth and career and maybe making more money, I'd go straight to the achievement talk. And I'd talk about, so if you get that course and you get your, college diploma, where are you going to be working? What are you going to be doing? How much are you going to be making? The questions would resonate more with their values. So when I started to ask values-based questions, I could now connect the changes that needed to be made to the actual goal. And it started to truly change everything, beginning with values-based questions, beginning with questions that could help me to really get to know who someone is and what they want out of life. When we mine for values, we connect. And when we connect, we get honesty and trust. Mining for values can also look like something like this. Hey, I know you've had some different workers in the past. Tell me something you really appreciated about a past worker, and tell me something that you didn't appreciate. And then by building trust, I could say, okay, I'm going to work really hard to not do that thing that really upset you. I really want to work well together, and I want to support you in this goal and in your goals. So when I started to shift from what motivates me and diving right into my typical case management talk to what actually motivates the learner, and started actually really asking questions that were about, so what would become possible if I knew that their children were their driving force, for example, then I would say, so what would education show and teach you? What would getting your education and being the first person to get their education in your family, what would that do for your children? What would that teach them? What message would that be giving them? Or if I knew that their children having a really good life, was their motivating factor, then I would also say things like, sorry, I'm just seeing a hand up there again. And I don't know if we're opening up a mic or not. So I would ask questions that were related to, so instead of saying, if you go back to school and you get your grade 12 and you go on to college, you're going to get that dream job. It's going to be great. Instead, I would say, you know what? If we can get you signed up for these LBS courses and start to learn, any of our courses that we were offering, if we can start to work on, more proficiently reading or even work on your math a little bit to prepare you, not only will it prepare you for college if you decide down the road. However, most importantly, you'll be able to help your little daughter with their homework, or you'll be able to read a bedtime story. So I started to market the goals or the achievement piece to actually be in alignment with all those answers they gave me about their values. And that started to change things. Yeah, I'm just curious. Joe, do you have your hand up that you want to ask a in the moment question? Nope. Okay. All right. All right. So a couple of other pieces that I started thinking about when I was putting this together, a couple of client examples. I want to share with you, there was an individual that we were working with in our community who was labeled as unmotivated, non-compliant. That's okay, Joe. Thank you. Non-compliant, unmotivated. He was banned from services. Let me tell you why. He was angry, agitated, sometimes didn't show up, sometimes fell asleep. Because of his temper, he had lost access to his children. He wasn't seeing his kids on weekends anymore. He had lost his housing. He was staying in the shelter. He was completely hopeless and he was angry. When he went into many different offices of employment services, Ontario Works, any of the agencies around our community, he was often asked to leave because he would get angry and upset and agitated. And no word of a lie, two of us at my previous office worked with him through the Getting Ahead program, and we started working through his resources and his barriers and the issues that were happening. And I very quickly found out that his motivating factor was to see those children again. We kept sending him to agency appointments, from Canadian Mental Health to LBS to Employment Services to you name it. We were sending him all over the community, and he wasn't showing up and disengaged. However, what we found out in conversation by asking those questions, like what's most important to you? What could make life just a little bit better for you? We quickly found out that he was absolutely devastated at not seeing his children. And when I asked the question, what's getting in the way? He said he knew that he had some health related issues. He knew that something was going on, that he wasn't sure what it was, but that he had not reconnected with his doctor because he had felt as though his doctor didn't understand some of his cultural beliefs. Through a lot of work in our community and collaboration, we got him into the VON clinic and he got some blood work done. And very quickly, we found out that he had type 1 diabetes. That man, everything that he had been portraying for several months and banned from services, he was unwell, absolutely. And he was agitated. And I'm not ever suggesting that somebody should feel unsafe in providing services. But when we don't actually get underneath the behavior and ask ourselves, what are we missing here? And when we don't actually find out what's the motivating factor here, which was in this case was his children, then there's this misalignment that begins to happen. And we keep sending him to different programs and services and workshops, but we actually miss an opportunity to help him stabilize his life. He very quickly got treatment, got his blood sugar levels under control. When that was well explained and he started to get back to his normal self, he was able to advocate to see his children again. And I've never seen a happier man in my life as when he got to see his children again, which therefore then motivated him to get housing, to increase his income, to have his children on weekends again, to find employment, etc., etc. We often misunderstand a lack of motivation when there's unwellness, physical health issues, mental health issues, a number of different other hidden factors that can be underneath the behavior. And so by asking the questions that I mentioned to you around finding out what he was motivated for and what was getting in the way and what was most important to him, we were actually able to take a completely different approach. And we were one of the only agencies that didn't ban him from services. And, he is very obviously grateful for, that outcome and sees his children again and went on to find work. So my invitation is to find out what the person is motivated for. And when I, suggested to him about getting blood work and ruling out things, and he was like, what's the point? I've been there, I've done it all. There's no point. Nobody helps me. And so I connected it to the children. Now, his name wasn't George, but I'm just going to use that as an example. You know what, George, I understand that you are completely, at this point, you just feel deflated. And I understand that it's been really frustrating for you. But if you're right and there's something underlying that's a health issue, don't we owe it to your children to try and find out what that is so that you can see them again? Those are the kinds of conversations that we can have that actually speak to the heart of the person and their motivation. Thank you, Janet. One more quick story for you. I worked with someone who was very, very unwell for a long time and with their usage of several different substances and ultimately mental health issues and very, very unwell, extremely unwell. Again, labeled, difficult, banned from services, often angry. The community was afraid of him. And it ended up that he had an undiagnosed, very serious mental health condition. And when we collaborated and worked with the hospital, and it took a lot of work with our police department, with the hospital, to actually have him assessed and formed because he was a risk to the community. Instead of just banning him from services, he got treated. He's no longer on the streets, went on to find work and reconnected with his family. And his motivating factor was to reconnect with his family. So that was the carrot that we dangled. That was the piece that we kept talking to him about, was how this would reconnect him to his family. Gaps in collaboration are, they sure are, Mike. There's no doubt about that. And it's not, both of those stories are not without a lot of angst and a lot of frustration and a lot of work. But I share those stories with you because there were several times that we as community agencies had misaligned it to be a lack of motivation. Both instances, the individuals were motivated for many different things. You know, I've worked with many people struggling with mental health and addictions and have been touched in so many different ways on a personal and a professional level with people that I care about with addictions. And I've never seen such motivation in my entire life as someone who is in the crux of their addiction. There is nothing that they would not give up or do to fulfill that need or that want. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's a healthy motivation, but if we can actually connect the change with, like, if we can actually make the person make the argument for change and not us. So our approach about sobriety, it is continuously talking about, you know, getting into treatment and services. But if we can connect the goal of sobriety to the values that that person is actually telling us. And in this case, I worked with an individual who had no contact with their own children through their entire upbringing and had a lot of regret for that. And then found out that his one child was expecting. And that made that man drop to his knees, that he wanted to be a better grandfather than he ever was a father. And so we continued to work on that. So how would getting sober, how would getting treatment, how would that actually connect to that goal of being the grandfather that you've always wanted to be? Of course, I want to help him get into school and get a job, but if I can help him with the sobriety through the very things that are motivating him, then that's where we can evoke change talk. And to this day, that gentleman actually shares that he got sober because of the upcoming grandchild. And he is still sober this day because he swears that his child will never, there's actually two clients with the same story, that grandchild will never see him in this type of shape that his children did. When we ask powerful coaching questions, it is amazing, Tara. Thank you. When we ask powerful questions that really get at the root of what's most important to people, we can now connect the goal of education, employment, etc., to the values of the learner, to what's most important for them. So, hey, how would a relationship with your grandchild feel? Take me there. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What are you doing with them? And then we plan backwards to get to treatment, sobriety, maintenance, employment, all the other pieces. The person does the change talking, not us. These strategies and stories that I've shared with you are all true. And as a fellow fixer, I will tell you, it's been very hard for me to self-manage my need to give advice. It's been very hard for me to self-manage when somebody's motivated for something that I don't quite see, that I don't quite resonate with myself. It's been difficult for me to not use the parent voice and to say, hey, you need to do this, or you should do that, or you have to do that, or what about this, or what about that. It's been difficult for me to move into a partnership and use an adult voice where we're talking with one another, not at. When you feel less than or separate from in the community, you don't show up as the best version of yourself. And so connection is truly where it's at first. The engagement, that connection is where it's at first, so that we can build trust, so that we can then start to get at those motivating factors. You would be amazed at how we can evoke change talk when we actually connect it to the values the person holds. And remember, they might not be the same value that you hold. And there lies the self-management piece. All right, so let's talk about this motivational coach approach as we begin to wind down. Well, curiosity beats judgment every single time. So the next time that you might be tempted to judge someone for not sharing your same drive, get curious. Ask yourself, I wonder what matters most to them. I wonder what they're working towards that I can't see. I wonder what drives them. And how can I respect that a little more? Asking myself those questions has really forced me out of judgment and into curiosity. What am I missing here? And when I swap judgment for curiosity, it changes everything. It softens my relationships, it softens my approach. Even with the most angry, agitated people, I'm thinking, what am I missing here? It expands my perspective, the lens for which I view the person. I start to see the person as diverse, whole, and creative with different driving forces than I might have. And that makes my collaboration with them easier. And to be honest, it also helps me to take better care of myself. Because when I force myself to get curious over judgmental, it actually forces me to practice a little more self-care. What am I missing? What do I need to do differently? Instead of fix, 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 fix. So motivational factors are diverse and personal, and it's up to us to figure out what those are by asking evoking, questions that get at the root of who the person truly is. Effective coaching means we don't impose our ideas and our solutions. We ask. And meeting clients where they're at really does build trust. Acknowledgement is a huge piece. Good one, Janet. It's coming up on this one right here. So ask, don't assume. Curiosity totally moves us over judgment. These are your little check boxes for takeaways. When we get curious, honestly, this has allowed me to challenge myself in so many different ways. And when I find myself just a little bit annoyed, or I find myself using that unmotivated kind of language, or thinking they're just not motivated, I think I truly do say to myself, what am I missing here? What's driving them that I don't see? And if it's survival, then how can I connect our services to their increased survival? How can I actually connect the dots for them instead of jumping to the pipe dream of self-sufficiency and employment? How can I help bring it down to baby steps through curious questions? Listen for those motivating factors and then reframe it using their motivational language. When I think about all the questions that I've asked in the past, I was often using my motivational language and not the person's. So when we really truly listen for motivating factors and reframe it, we actually start to see, different results, and we actually start to hear things that we might like. Really truly listening. In coaching, we talk about that as level 1, 2, and 3. And level 1 listening is where you're thinking about what you're going to say next. You're in your own head. And we spend about 75% of our time in level 1 listening, actually thinking about what I'm going to ask next, what ideas I have for this person, what am I thinking? Does that resonate for anybody? Just give me a yes or no, where you're thinking in the intake what you're going to ask next before you've even fully heard the whole story. And it's because we're busy. Like it truly is because we're busy. It's not our fault. We're programmed that way. It's about getting the paperwork done. Level 2 listening, though, is where I'm completely listening to the other person, completely just listening to the other person and their story, and I'm fully present. And it takes a lot for me to do that, to be honest. It takes a lot for many of us to do that. And then level 3 listening is where I'm actually hearing what's not being said. Yeah, me too, Heather. Level 3 is where I'm hearing the values through your story. You're not saying to me, I value, my health, but I'm hearing it in your story. And I'm hearing what's not being said. I'm hearing emotions, struggles, values. I'm noticing a crack in your voice. I'm picking up on what's most important to you just in that 5 minute conversation by truly listening in a level 2, 3. It's more global. It's like listening to everything about the story and everything that's underneath the story. And that allows me to get curious in response. So I might say, help me understand that a little bit more, or, help me get underneath that a little bit more. And even, I'm just going back a slide for 1 second, because when we think about this one, if I have trust and relationship with the individual, and we've talked about this goal, we've connected it to their change talk, and then I continue to see repeat behaviors that are not following through. I'm actually able to say, hey, listen, you know what, Susie, we have talked about you wanting to get your GED a number of different times, and you've said it's important to you. And yet, each time that you leave, you are really motivated to continue and to pursue that. And when you come back next time, nothing's happened. And I'm noticing a pattern here. I feel like I'm missing something in supporting you. What am I missing? What's getting in the way? It becomes much easier to actually call out and connect this motivation talk and these questions when we have rapport and when we have trust. All right, let's move into recognize and align the supports and what gives them resonance and energy. When we ask people who are their champions, then we want to champion those champions. When we ask them who are their saboteurs, we don't want to say, well, then, you know what, you don't want to spend time with Joey because he's using and that's going to jeopardize your sobriety. But we might want to say, how do you want to cope with that then? What's one small thing you could do that might mitigate the risk of you using if Joey's around? The same question my coach asked me about smoking. Recognize and listen. Do you know 90% of our Getting Ahead graduates internationally tell us that it was a relationship, a support system, a person that believed in them and walked beside them that helped them to actually achieve their goal? And that's all of us on this call. We are all the support systems of the people that we serve and the learners that we serve through all of their challenges. We are their support systems. So we want to be cautious that we're building trust and that we're asking, questions that really are evocative around the supports and building resonance. You can tell dissonance between resonance and energy very, very easily. Have you thought about going back to school and the person goes, yeah, maybe. That's a dissonance kind of a response. When I say, I know we've talked about school a couple of times, what would that change for you? And then the person starts to dream a little bit with me. You can feel the resonance in an answer. So you can feel if you're on the track of resonance compared to dissonance. And finally, someone said in the chat just a little bit ago, acknowledging and championing. Sometimes we are the only support system to actually be able to champion and acknowledge, but this is a huge coaching skill. Acknowledgement is noticing an inner attribute. So let me give you an example. That maybe this client and this learner has missed 10 appointments with me, and they finally come in on appointment number 11. And as we're walking back to my office, I say, hey, you know what? What's been going on? I haven't seen you in several appointments. Are you okay? Is everything all right? And I'm so glad you came in today. And they say, yeah, you know what? My sister's been not feeling very well. And so I've been helping out with my nieces and nephews. So I've been really busy. Or I help my buddy move on the weekend or whatever. Anything that you can take a moment to acknowledge, I would stop in my tracks and just turn and say, wow, with everything you've got going on, you're helping your sister out so much. She is very lucky to have you. That's amazing. Your family's obviously really important to you. Take and find those small minutes to be able to acknowledge the kindness and the gifts that our learners are offering out in the community to family, to friends, whether it's volunteering, whether it's helping friends. But notice them and acknowledge them. You might be the only person acknowledging them. Secondly, championing. Championing, you might be the only person that champions them. And that means that you believe in them and that you believe that they've got it. So we don't scold if something happens, but we say, hey, what got in the way? And then when we come up with a strategy, for this next time, that I say, you know what, I believe in you. You've got this. And I'm here for you every step of the way. When we think about all of these different coach approaches and trying to break down the motivation talk, the biggest takeaway is really, again, that get curious, not judgmental, and reframe asking yourself, what matters most to this person? And how can I acknowledge that? How can I meet them where they're at? How can I ask questions that would connect what matters most to them to the future story of what our agency provides? How can I ask questions that connect those dots for them? Because many of us might have grown up in an environment that we were taught those things, and not everybody was. Not everybody had achievement related conversations growing up. And so when we think about, how we can actually meet people where they're at, one of the biggest pieces I also want to leave you with is designing your relationships with the folks you're serving. As soon as you begin working with a new learner, just take 5 minutes to say, hey, what do you hope to get out of our services? What do you need from me as your worker here? Hey, with your permission, can I share what I need from you? This creates a basis of being able to not only mine for values and ask then those values related questions, but it actually helps us to design a relationship where we're both accountable to one another. It's in that moment that when I say, hey, it's really important to me that, if we make an appointment, if you can't make it, just drop me off a note or leave me a quick voicemail so that I can give the appointment to somebody else. Would that be okay with you? And then if they don't do that, then I actually am able to reference back on this conversation. This builds trust and it builds connection with people before we dive right into goal setting. Without trust, we don't have honesty. Without honesty, we can't truly meet somebody where they're at because we don't even know where they're at because they haven't been honest with us. It all begins with designing trusting and engaging relationships and, connecting again the goals to um, their motivating factors. Now, lots of people ask me, so I just want to throw this one out here. Lots of people ask me, but what do you do about the people that are so unwell? How do you engage with people that are just so unwell? Pop in and out of services. They're being referred for services. We need to do something with them. And so I always share this story. Let's get creative. There was an individual that I was working with one time, and I had very little time to get an outcome for him, basically, because he was flagged as being on assistance for too long. And this person struggled with their mental health, with their addiction, with their wellness, with their temper, with so many different pieces. And I kept booking appointments, and they didn't show up. And so finally, I took this approach. And I'll just say his name was, I don't know, Larry. His name wasn't Larry, but I'm just making that up. When he came in, finally, he popped in only because I had the check on hold so that I could see him. I said, Larry, listen, here's the thing. I know that you're struggling. I know that you're in unsafe living conditions. I know that you're struggling, by virtue of you being honest with me with your substance use and recovery. And to be quite honest, when you just don't show up to see me for weeks or months at a time, I am incredibly worried about you. I don't know if you're okay. I don't know if you're in a ditch. I don't know where you are. And I'm worried because I care about you. Now, this person was typically angry, agitated, and just came in because they had to. And his eyes welled up. And I said, or at some point in that welling up of eyes, he said, I've never had anybody say that to me. You care about me? But it was kind of with a little bit of anger, to be honest. And I said, I do. I actually really care about you. And I know that you have so much going on your plate, and my job is to stay connected with you one way or the other. And I know that you're not in a place right now to be talking about these changes, and we're just in the preliminary phases of building trust. So I'm just going to ask you this question. What's your favorite number? And he said 11. And I said, okay, Larry, would you agree that on the 11th of each month, you will either drop off a note for me or leave me a voicemail message that just tells me you're okay? Just tell me you're okay. And when you're ready to talk about a little bit more than just I'm okay, then I'm here for you. It only took 2 times for him to drop off a note, leave a voicemail, and on the third time, he actually asked to talk to me. And then he actually started to talk about how he wanted to change his life. If we can build connection, if we can build trust, and by the way, he did go on to treatment and he did go on to share his story at some of my trainings. And so, if we can actually build trust with people who sometimes seem like they're unreachable. And so, I've tried to share stories of some of our most disengaged individuals in the community where it felt like it was at a lost cause, and tried to recognize that they were also all motivated for something. We are all motivated for something. We're just motivated differently. And when we stop judging and start understanding, we don't just become nicer people at our jobs, but we become more compassionate, more empathetic, more caring. It reconnects us to why we got into this work in the first place. So the next time you even think of that unmotivated word, because we all do it from time to time in our busyness, in our hectic schedules. The next time you think about that, just pause and self-manage and ask yourself, what don't I know here? What are they motivated for that I don't see? How can I figure out what motivates them? That small shift from judgment to curiosity is how we can start seeing each other as full, unique, diverse, complex humans instead of just a checklist of goals or a checklist of just getting them off our list. So I hope today with some of the tips and tricks and questions and list of questions, I'm happy to send that big list of questions out to anybody who wants it. And happy to share, anything that I've talked about together today, because I do a lot of my slides by pictures, as you've noticed. So a lot of my slide decks are mental models, and then I just sort of talk about strategies and approaches that I've had. So the slide deck aren't going to give you, yeah, for sure, Destin, no problem. My email is right there, and you can feel free to reach out to me and I will send you, I have a list of powerful questions that I ask to try and get at the values of diverse individuals and diverse learners that we are working with, and to try and truly figure out what are the motivating factors so that I can reshift the way I ask the questions and my coach approach. So feel free to reach out if you'd like that list. I'm happy to respond, and just make sure that you don't use them in a script format. That it's more that again, it comes from the heart. So I'm always careful when I give out templates or anything like that. Make them yours in such a way that comes from the heart and not just, the old, I'm kind of an anti-chat GPT person, to be honest, because I'm like, we have to bring our heart into this work, and our heart into the questions. And so it's not just a matter of using the script or using the questions. It's more about bringing what we hear, what we truly hear, and bringing our heart into the conversation with those most vulnerable, diverse learners that we are working with. So happy to share, but please, I'll probably add a little disclaimer there that says, please put your heart into this. All right, just reading the chat here. I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. You're very welcome. I'm so glad that you have enjoyed it. I wasn't sure the list can be sent. Yeah, that I'm okay with that, Heather, if that works. So I'm happy I should have actually maybe been a little bit more ready for it and I could have uploaded it into the chat, but I'm not right now. So I will share that through and it can get sent out to the attendees if that's okay. Thank you, Judith. Okay, with that being said, I'm just going to open it up for any questions so Stacy, I can send that through to you guys. Okay, awesome. We'll just open it up for if anybody does want to have any questions or want to chat. I'm curious, was this what you were hoping for today? And anything I didn't answer to? Don't be shy. You can use the chat or raise your hand. there's anything at all that I can help just deepen the learning for you. Oh, Mike's got his hand up. Good. I always love it when somebody's got something. Thank Mike. Thanks, Heather. I think somebody needs to open
There you
Mike's.
go. I'm
There we
unmuted.
go. Hi, Mike.
Um, because of my life experience, I've been in probably 50 different homeless shelters across Canada as a client.
Yeah.
And I've noticed fear is a great factor for a lot of my learners. Um,
Mm,
to approach that topic is really, I find it difficult to say, are you afraid of, it's to broach that topic about fear and saying, just my experience wasn't their experience. I can't,
hmm.
well, I'm 8 years sober and blah, blah, blah.
Good
And
for
it
you.
doesn't match up to their experience because I'm not them.
Yes.
So yeah, any pointers on how to maybe approach the topic of fear?
Yeah, you know what, Mike? I think that's an excellent question. So thank you so much for asking it because I think sometimes we might suspect that there's something under there. And I find especially with any fear or insecurities or anxiety about anything, it's better not to name it as such. And instead, when you feel as though the person trusts you, and trust is felt, right? So when you feel like you're building that connection and that trust, then I might say, you know what, Mike? I feel like I'm missing something. What's stopping you? What's getting in the way? And that's when, if they trust me enough, I can get underneath that fear. But if they don't trust me enough, they're probably not going to open up yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's the same as everything else, always putting the power for change in their hands,
Yes.
giving them that opportunity to bring it forward. Thank you.
Yeah. Truly, it is those what and how questions and then a pause. When I say, what's getting in the way, but then I have to allow the silence because silence just means they're thinking and they might be thinking, am I brave enough to tell her? Do I feel comfortable enough? Do I trust her enough? And so I have to give them time to think. And for the first 20 years of my career, I filled the space. I'd say, what's stopping you? And then I'd go, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And I didn't give them a chance to actually change talk themselves. So that's one of the biggest learnings is ask the questions and then just listen. And then ask another question from that and then just listen. And you'd be amazed what will unfold from that. It also helped my burnout, to be honest. Is that helpful, Mike?
Oh, greatly. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And congratulations.
And
Thank you for
I
sharing.
I
Sorry.
just wanted to say this was way more informative than I thought it was going to be. So thank you.
Oh, that's awesome. I had no idea what you guys were hoping for. So that's great. Thank you so much, Mike. Jim, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I was just wondering, how do you deal with when you trigger people and then, you can't seem to move beyond, they can't seem to move beyond the trigger.
Hmm.
Yeah, how do you help?
Usually I name that. So if I sense right away that I've triggered something or I've stepped on something, I'm very cautious about the way I ask questions, first of all. But if I say, what's stopping you, and then I can see a little bit of agitation or I might have triggered something, and they're not ready to talk about it, then I will name that right away. I'm a big believer in name, and I'll say, you know what, I feel like maybe that question may have triggered something in you, and I had no intention of upsetting you whatsoever. Let me reframe that a little bit, or is there something else that I could do to make you feel a little more comfortable in this moment?
So, how do we help move them beyond the trigger though? I guess that's quite, if that's the big issue.
Yeah. So can you give me a little bit more context? Like you've asked something and they are what? Frustrated, agitated?
Or
Did they
maybe
say?
just break down crying.
Okay.
And,
Okay. So when there's emotions, that's okay.
hmm
I
yeah.
might say, what's coming up for you right now? How can I help? I might not even name the trigger. I will name the trigger if I think I've made them angry. And
Okay.
I'll say, you know what? I'm sorry. I did not mean to offend you in any way. And that truthfully is coming from the heart. I wouldn't say it if it wasn't coming from the heart. But if it's emotions, then I literally just let the emotions happen because emotions it could be a release. It could be so many different things. They trust you enough to be emotional.
Hmm.
And so I might say, after a couple of minutes, and I'll offer a Kleenex, and then I might just say, what's coming up for you now with this? What are you thinking? Where's your head at with this now? What are you taking away from this? Whatever the case may be, but it might just be a check-in kind of a question.
hmm
And not necessarily diving down deep into the trauma, but actually just sort of what's coming up now. How can I support you best is what you're trying to get at.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Courtney and one other, sorry, two, Courtney and Jim.
Hopefully I haven't jumped the queue here.
That's okay.
Um, I've had an experience a few times recently. Um, I'm a petite-ish woman who can look younger than my age. I've had two learners recently that, while they haven't come out and said it, if I had to sort of figure out what was motivating them, they're they're sort of looking for a power and control sort of dynamic. So if we're working on reading and I'm saying we need to work on phonics and they don't want to work on phonics, I mean, obviously I'm open to different types of learning strategies and some things are hard, some things are triggering. But I've had two recent experiences where someone's, I want services provided this way and you're to provide them to me this way. I want to learn this thing and this is how I want you to teach me.
Mm,
And if I try and think about that motivation, or even when I've spoken to them about that motivation, it's, well, there's no one else here to help me, and I deserve someone to help me. I deserve that relationship where you're helping me
hmm
in the way I want, not the way you keep talking about, or
mm,
not the way that is difficult for me or unpleasant for me. And
right.
I've struggled with how to navigate that with some sensitivity to those sort of yucky power and control
Yeah.
dynamics that you start to feel.
Yeah. So a couple things come to mind for me, Courtney. That's a great question. I think it's one that many of us have struggled with. So the first thing I would suggest is, do you remember when I mentioned the tool about designing the alliance? I think that that
Mhm.
is a game changer for us in human services to actually talk at the beginning of the relationship about, what do you want from our services? What do you need from me as your instructor? Here's what I need from you. It's actually the way to be able to massage and sort out what kind of teaching or experience or facilitation they're looking for so that you're able to say, oh, you know what, actually, this is how our agency does that. How can we meet in the middle here? So it actually gets ahead of the same issue that you're talking about. It actually talks about it proactively instead of reactively.
Mhm.
So that's one of the pieces I'm going to suggest for moving forward with someone who is consistently, there's this power dynamic piece. If there's any part that I can give of what they need, I will. Because you're
Mhm.
talking about people who feel powerless in a system. And so wherever we can give into what it is that they need to make it most successful, then we need to try and do that. So I might say, hey, you know what? I'm able to do this that you're looking for, but this is something that I'm actually not able to do because of our policies or whatever the case may be. So I'd
Mhm.
really take a look at what is it that they're asking for and what part of that can we or can we not do to meet in the middle. Because if we can start to meet in the middle and we can design with people how we're going to be able to provide services, et cetera, and how we're going to work together, we can actually get ahead of that instead of it being sort of misalignment, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So with that person, I'd say, hey, you know what? I want to have a little bit of a conversation about how we're going to work together. It feels like there's a bit of a push and pull here between you and I. And I think it might be timely for us to sit down and chat about what you need from me, what I need from you, what we're able to offer each other to make sure that we're that we're both getting what we need out of this relationship. Would that be okay with you?
Hmm. And I certainly don't want to seem as though I'm being unkind.
No,
Or
no.
not providing,
Yeah.
assistance. It's providing that extra assistance that can and you leave you in the situation where they're angry when there isn't, right?
Yeah.
So I certainly don't want to seem that, I'm here to help you with your horse and get out, just to
Yeah. No, no, of course not. No, no.
identify where I'm coming
Yeah.
from.
No, absolutely. But if they're asking for something that you're not able to provide, then I think that warrants sitting down and talking that through and explain. Everybody needs to understand the why.
Hmm.
And so if we can sit down and say, hey, you know what? It felt like you left last time, not on the greatest of terms, and I just want to revisit that a little bit and talk about what happened, where we can meet in the middle, what we can do to work better together moving forward, and not have any sort of disconnect. Like I'm just a big believer in naming it and saying, hey, when you left last
Hmm.
time, it didn't feel 100% with between us. And so I just kind of wanted to chat about how we can work better together. I
Thank you
think
so
that
much. That's very
model,
helpful.
yeah, you're welcome. And that is modeling for the vulnerable people who might not have had a model about how to navigate and negotiate conflict. Like if you grew up in a
Hmm.
household of survival, negotiating and talking things through is not necessarily coming as easily or as normally for you as it might be for others. And so you're their mentor in that situation to try and kind of show them how to negotiate as opposed to get angry.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a difficult space for sure.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
is. It is. Yeah, Tracy put in the chat, name it, acknowledge it, get curious. Yeah, name it. Hey, we got a problem. I'm sorry that we have a problem. I want to work better together. I'm sorry that we're both struggling. Let's talk about how we can work more effectively together. What I can do, what you can do, and how we can work better together.
Okay, thank you.
We are always going to have difficult learners in this work. And what happens is if we don't name it, acknowledge it, and get curious, then it goes festering and then it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I hope that helps. I know we had a hard stop at 3:30. I remember Stacy telling me that because of our interpreters, which thank you so much to our interpreters for their hard work in and helping to support this. I'm just reading the chat. Yeah, Dessa, I love that. And I always say to people, here's my last little piece of advice for you before we close out because it's 3:30. I always say to people, if we're able to share our own experiences and we've unpacked them, that's great because now we're sharing to help people learn. If we're sharing and we haven't unpacked it yet, we might not want to share. So that's my biggest advice to people in human services. So I love that you share and help your learners feel more comfortable in the work that you're doing. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you, Heather, for inviting me.
Well, thank you very much, Susie. I think you gave a lot of sage advice there and practical examples, which, really give us all a little bit more to think about just how we approach our learners and, so that they feel comfortable. So,
Yeah.
so
Awesome.
appreciate it. That's-
Awesome. Okay, I'll send through Heather to you the list that can go out to the group then, and with a preamble of please don't just, use them without heart.
Right. Yes, for sure. Because our learners will see right through you if
That's
you
right.
don't.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for attending.